Tonight on Lead Story, Jamaica's parliament is divided over the most consequential piece of legislation since Hurricane Melissa, the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority Bill, known as the NARA Bill, has drawn a rare crossbench challenge. A former Attorney General sitting on the government's own benches has told the Prime Minister to rework it. We're asking tonight, does this bill solve Jamaica's implementation deficit, or does it expand executive power in ways that demand closer scrutiny? Also tonight, Jamaica may be sitting on oil, but scientists are asking whether the country can afford the risk. The Walton Morant Basin off the coast of St. Thomas has produced encouraging early exploration results. The Jamaica Environment Trust says encouraging is not the same as safe. And St. Kitts and Nevis has declared itself the first Caribbean nation to formally recognize Rastafari in law. Jamaica's government disagrees. But tonight we ask whether the birthplace of Rastafari has fully secured the rights of those who live it. Plus, beach access and safety, public spaces, private risks, and a question of state responsibility. I'm Jody Ann Quarry, and this is Lead Story. On October 28, 2025, Hurricane Melissa made landfall near New Hope, Westmoreland. The government's legislative response is a National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority Bill, the NARA Bill. First tabled on March 19, the bill drew immediate concern from civil society, including Jamaicans for Justice and the Jamaica Environment Trust. The Prime Minister retabled a revised version on April 14. Multilateral institutions, the IMF, World Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, and CAF, as well as the Caribbean Development Bank, have jointly committed up to $6.7 billion United States dollars to Jamaica's reconstruction. So, the pressure to legislate quickly is real. But this week, the revised bill faced a challenge from an unexpected quarter. Member of Parliament for St. James West Central and former Attorney General of Jamaica, Marlene Malahoo Fort, told the House that the bill needs some reworking. She noted that Section 4 gives the authority both the power to procure contracts and the power to oversee compliance with those very same contracts, calling it bad practice for anyone to provide oversight duties to themselves. Opposition member Peter Bunting described the bill as a fiscal free-for-all and warned that it concentrates sweeping powers within the executive. State Minister on the government side, however, Delana Seavright, has defended the legislation, pointing to cabinet oversight, audit requirements, and a public project register, as well as clear dissolution dates as the bill's accountability architecture. There are also some questions about overlap. The Gleaner's editorial board asking whether the government has answered the question. What happens to places like the Urban Development Corporation, the UDC, when NARA absorbs their projects, including the reconstruction of the Kingston Public Hospital and the development of a new airport that falls squarely within the UDC's existing mandate? To talk to us about all of that, we have Mikel Jackson, Executive Director of Jamaicans for Justice, one of the civil society organizations that has reviewed both versions of this bill. Ms. Jackson, good evening.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much, Jody, and good evening to your listeners as well.
Mikel Jackson, Jamaicans for Justice was among the first organizations to raise concerns about the NARA bill. Now that the Prime Minister has retabled a revised version, have those concerns been substantively addressed, or has the bill been repackaged without being reformatted?
The bill has just made a few changes. For example, the first iteration had no dissolution date. It's supposed to have a very clear sunset clause. So in other words, because it is here responding to a natural disaster, it should have a sunset clause that says, 4 years after the passage of the bill comes to an end, or you put a date, or you put something very clear that the minister will announce a date within a particular time frame. That was not there in the first iteration. That was what was amended. There were also some incongruences in the bill. For example, Section 5, I believe, said that the minister will appoint the CEO, while a schedule in the bill had indicated that the Prime Minister would appoint the CEO. A clarity was somehow sought and provided in the updated version of the bill, but there's still some lack of clarity, because in one instance it will say that the Prime Minister has oversight for the CEO, and then in another instance it said the minister. So that lack of clarity can lead to confusion when it comes to the actual implementation of the bill. So there were some areas that suggested that the bill had some rushed elements to it, and it needed some fine-tuning. However, the major concerns have substantially not been dealt with. The issue of oversight, the issue of accountability, transparency, and that it had too much of an executive overreach that needs some adjustment. We need to ensure that the legislator is able to give that type of scrutiny, given the billions of dollars that we can expect to actually be managed by this authority, and the authority lacks clarity in who the authority is beyond the chief executive officer.
You said that the legislator needs to have some oversight. Are you then speaking specifically about Parliament and then being able to take a look at what goes on at NARA?
Absolutely. And let me say this, just so the listeners can appreciate it, Jody. We want to ensure that we move as quickly as possible, but we want to ensure that we do not sacrifice good governance for expediency. And with that in mind, we have to look at who manages it. So when we look at best practices in Dominica, for example, it very clearly says that the authority reports to Parliament every so often. It defines the period within which the authority reports to Parliament. The authority in Dominica, and we can learn from them, it has public consultation, for example. So when we have an authority that is setting up, that reports to the executive, that doesn't have strong procurement processes within it, that doesn't have clarity in terms of even how that reporting process to the Parliament occurs, then one asks ourselves, how do we ensure that effective legislative oversight is there? One could counter and say, yes, we have the PAC,
you have the PAC, you have the PAC as money is being spent, a review section after the money is being spent. But one could also say you have JAMROC, that is the Jamaica Reconstruction and Resilient Oversight Committee. We've heard about that committee. There had been some concerns that had been raised by JFJ and Jamaica Environment Trust around JAMROC, saying that it didn't look like it was integrated enough to be able to provide the checks and balances. Is that a functional check on power now, or is it just smoke and mirrors?
But let's start there. When we look at the Integrity Commission, for example, yes, we have PAC and yes, we have PAC, but the Integrity Commission has an oversight committee to ensure that there's greater scrutiny from Parliament. That's one. We have JAMROC. Let's put in context that JAMROC is an administrative body. It is not spelled out in NARA. There's actually no board oversight spelled out in NARA. JAMROC could theoretically be dissolved at the whim of the executive branch without ever being tabled in Parliament for Parliament to have scrutiny of JAMROC. So one asks the question, if we have an authority that gives sweeping power to a chief executive officer, the chief executive officer reports to the Prime Minister and the Minister, Cabinet, then you ask yourself the question, who else is named in this authority? Where is the oversight body in terms of broader governance oversight and not an advisory capacity as JAMROC is currently envisioned? Why not put JAMROC in the NARA bill, where you clearly spell out what are the roles and functions of JAMROC, how will JAMROC actually be given that oversight, a little bit more than an advisory function now, but actual oversight and independent scrutiny that supports rather than give conflict to what cabinet is doing. And that's the crux of the matter. There's so many other elements within the bill, Jodian. But please ask the question and then I can
because that
continue.
is something in broad strokes what we just heard as well on Tuesday from former Attorney General Mali Malahou Fort, who on her feet in Parliament indicated that this bill could use some more reworking, indicating that Section 4, for example, gives NARA both the power to procure contracts and the power to monitor and enforce compliance with those same contracts. Are those concerns that you have as well?
Absolutely. And if I could just mention the issue of procurement, how the bill is framed, it is so broadly written. It says to procure and issue contracts. Procure and issue contract within what framework? Yes, we want it to be fast-tracked, but we have to say fast-tracked how? What type of oversight will be done? How does that tie into, for example, a real-time dashboard that us as citizens, some of us who actually gave money to hurricane relief efforts, can go on a website and say, okay, person A got contract at a particular dollar value. That is a type of robust oversight. What does fast-tracking of procurement processes mean, and why can't we spell out some broad elements in the NARA bill? So, for example, fast track means that based on the procurement processes, if you expend, for example, over $10 million, you can follow these particular procedural guidelines.
And those are the sorts of things that you are, and Michael Jackson, those are the sorts of things that you and other civil society advocates, as you look at this legislation, say are not spelled out in the legislation. And with this now revised document that has been brought before Parliament this month, you still need to see more. It's clear that this document still needs some working to address some of the issues that have been raised, but we're also wanting to talk on the other side to those who say this revision fixes those issues, especially given the speed at which we need to operate. But Michael Jackson, Executive Director of Jamaicans for Justice, thank you so much for being with us tonight inside Lead Story.
Thank you so much.
After the break, Jamaica may be sitting on oil, but at what cost? We examine the evidence. Lead Story continues.
Notice how life nice when you eat good. Natural feel, fresh grass, no stress. Stress? I don't know her. They say happy cows make better milk. Well, just look how happy we are. And I'm sure you can taste the difference. So move to the best milk ever. True Milk.
Power in great moments. If you have financial needs, Chris and Charles will fix them for you. Power in great moments since 1992. Oh, we have it all. Power in great moments. When relax, you got Chris and Charles. Oh, we have it all. When you think low, think Chris and Charles.
Jamaica's unemployment rate has fallen to 3.3%, down from 13.2% in 2016. Our government's continued focus on job creation is delivering real results. We are building Jamaica. The time by the Office of the Prime Minister is...
Welcome back. A few moments I discussed the Jamaica Environment Trust in the context of the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority Bill NARA, where they, along with Jamaicans for Justice, raised concerns about that piece of legislation. But Jet has spoken again, this time about oil. This month, United Oil and Gas released the results of a seabed geochemical survey. The analysis confirmed the presence of C4 and C5 hydrocarbons. The company says these findings suggest an active petroleum system off the coast of Jamaica. Some estimates have referenced a potential of up to 7 billion barrels of oil, though those figures remain unverified and no commercial discovery has been confirmed. Minister of Science, Energy, Telecommunications and Transport, Darrell Vaz, has described himself as cautiously optimistic. He has said drilling, if capital can be raised, would not commence before late 2027 or early 2028. Drilling a single well is estimated to cost between 60 million and 80 million United States dollars. The project would require at least 14 wells. But the potential oil area lies adjacent to the Pedro Bank and the Pedro Keys, ecologically sensitive areas that support fisheries, marine biodiversity, and the livelihoods of Jamaican fishing communities. The Jamaica Environment Trust has formally called on the government to reconsider the entire exploration path. Dr. Teresa Rodriguez Moody authored that call. She's a Chief Executive Officer of the Jamaica Environment Trust, and she joins us tonight. Dr. Rodriguez Moody, good evening.
Hello, good evening, Julia. Thanks for having me.
First, talk to us. Oil sounds exciting. We're in the middle of an oil spike. We see countries exploring for their own oil, and we feel and we look at ourselves and say, maybe if we had oil, we would be less affected. So the big question is Jamaica currently equipped legally and institutionally to regulate offshore oil extraction safely?
Well, to answer your immediate question, no, I don't think we are currently prepared for the what if coming out of the exploration activities. We already have serious challenges in terms of managing our environment. So, for example, we have, extractive industries are not new to Jamaica. We have the bauxite alumina industry, and that industry is over 70 years old at this point, but we have a whole host of issues associated with that industry that have never really been addressed. So I think that when we're looking at developing a new extractive industry, one that is really entirely new to Jamaica, in terms of, what it means to now drill wells and what could happen with a potential spill, blowout. These are things that I think we have a long way to go in terms of how are we going to manage. I mean, if we look at the conversation in terms of should we go ahead, the environmental risks are significant and great, and we don't really have a good track record of managing environmental risks and clean up after ourselves.
The concerns that are being raised now are happening in a time of excitement. The Walter Morant block lies adjacent to another place that we depend on, the Pedro Bank and the Pedro Keys. This excitement that's going on, though, is vying with this caution that you're asking us to have. Describe then for our viewers what's at stake ecologically in those areas and what a drilling incident in that region would mean for Jamaican fishing communities and for Jamaica's tourism economy.
Okay, so I do want to widen the discussion beyond just Pedro Banks, but let's just stick a pin at Pedro Banks. So Pedro Banks is a significant fishing area, and if we were supposed to have any kind of major ecological disaster caused by a blowout of a well, a major oil spill, and it could be related to drilling a well, whatever, whatever could be the cause. The fact is these things happen. They're not unusual. They've happened multiple times in multiple different jurisdictions in countries that have good, long-standing experience with drilling for oil. So I think it's something that we first need to erase from our mind, that it's not possible. We can manage it. These things happen. If we were supposed to have a spill, and I will say that it is even possible if Guyana were to have a major blowout, because even though their offshore wells are so far, you might think, away from Jamaica, we have currents, we have ocean currents, and scientists have indicated that it is possible that it could reach our south coast. So we have to be thinking about these things in terms of how could it affect our tourism products, how could it affect our fisheries sector. But I think why I want to widen the discussion is because these are risks, but they still go ahead with it. And the bigger risk, which is not being discussed adequately enough, is the climate risk.
That is why you want to broaden it, because Jamaicans are hearing you right now saying no to oil. Look how Jamaica could be rich and have sheiks and be wealthy. And Dr. Teresa Rodriguez Moody is saying save the fish. Why is the climate risk then something that you also want to broaden this conversation to involve, especially after Hurricane Melissa?
Right. So again, even the conversation about the economic benefits, I think so many people are immediately thinking that, oh, oil will translate to a cheaper bill for my electricity bill. It might mean more for us economically. I'm not saying that's not possible, but it really depends on the kind of negotiation that takes place between the company and the countries. So, for example, a lot of times what we see in these industries is that it makes people rich, but it doesn't make countries rich necessarily. It actually exacerbates inequality. So you have a lot of people that things getting more expensive and they no longer can afford it. So it really can exacerbate social risk, economic risks, and challenges in a country. The climate risk, which is a part that I think most Jamaicans will probably appreciate. We've just experienced Hurricane Melissa. That's just one climate impact. That's just one piece of the climate crisis that we have been told about by scientists and we've experienced. We are being warned that we're going to be going into an El Nino. I don't know if you can hear the heavy rain. We have a lot of unusual weather in terms of higher temperatures, in terms of longer dry periods. All of that is because of the burning of fossil fuels. And this is well established. So this is not something that I am...
Well established, Dr. Rodriguez Moody, but Dr. Irfan Ali, the president of Guyana, when he was confronted by a journalist with this very same question of how can you be a country that says that you're dealing with the impact and effects of climate change, but also be involved in oil exploration and drilling, said, listen, I'm not the major polluter. At this point in time, when we look at major polluters across the globe, I am not within that number. Jamaica, as it currently stands, is not a major polluter. Even if we were to find oil off of our coast, we still wouldn't be as big a polluter or nearly as long as other countries. Some are listening to you and saying you're being overly cautious here when the upside to this country could be improved costs of living, it could be improvements in healthcare. They're seeing the benefits, even better roads as a result of oil exploration here. Are you talking about the downsides without considering any of the upsides if we were very careful, if we were very cautious?
No, I think it's important. You see, what I'm trying to do is widen the conversation, because at the moment, the primary conversation that is being put forward to the Jamaican people is, we're going to get a break. We need a break. Hurricane Melissa did this. We had Hurricane Beryl. We had all of these different shocks. We had COVID. So oil is the break. And that conversation is very limited and narrow and focuses primarily on the potential economic benefits. And I'm not saying that there aren't economic gains to be made, but we cannot have a conversation of something that has on such a massive scale that can have such massive, devastating negative impacts as well. So if we're going to be talking about oil, we need to be talking about it in a way that people understand not just the potential positives, but also the potential negatives, because both are very real and have been experienced by multiple countries. Because again, when we talk about the economic benefits, many times, as with almost every extractive industry, it is concentrated. The economic gains are concentrated in the hands of a few. When we look at the bauxite alumina industry, for example, the benefits are mainly by a few.
And so
And
with
sure.
that on-the-ground experience that Jamaica has, you're not even going overseas and saying what others are doing. The on-the-ground experience here in Jamaica is what you're cautioning us to then have in mind. But there's also a bigger conversation going on right now. With global oil shocks, there is a global push towards renewables, a speeding up of that. How high is the risk of Jamaica ending up with something that's been called a stranded asset, expensive infrastructure for a commodity that the world is really and truly working very hard to move away from?
Right, and I think that's also a very important part of the conversation. Every year we have COP, Conference of the Parties, where countries come together to talk about how are we going to fix this climate crisis. And a big part of that is to phase out fossil fuels.
And that's under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change that says everybody recognizes this to be a problem. We're working towards dealing with that.
Correct. And there is a conference happening next week in Santa Marta, which focuses on how are we going to phase out fossil fuels. So it has been acknowledged and recognized we need to phase out fossil fuels. So this is why this conversation that we're having about pushing for drill by one of the most vulnerable countries, and in terms of small island developing states, we are extremely vulnerable as a group to climate change. We go on the stage and talk about asking countries to stop polluting, stop burning of fossil fuels. We ourselves have made commitments to reduce our emissions and to phase out fossil fuels, and we are making commitments to increase our renewable mix. So what I'm basically saying is, rather than going down the road of a very risky business, we need to be focusing on what we know is important and what we know has been accepted as the path, which is to increase our renewable energy mix into the energy. Well, increase our renewables into the energy mix, and to look at this fossil fuel dependence as move away from this fossil fuel dependence, because it's not the solution. And I think it's well documented that this is a path that we should take, and we should not be just blinded by the potential economic benefits and really look at this. I think there's too much confusion even at the government level. 1 minute we're talking about we need greater climate finance, we need funding for adaptation, we need all of these different things, we need energy security. And the next minute we're saying, let's go ahead and let's drill and let's, support this oil exploration.
It is those contradictions in a very small state that has to deal with the consequences of these things as we deal with a Hurricane Melissa, while asking for oil, that you're asking us to then be cautious about and, as you've said, make sure that there's room in the conversation for not only the potential upsides, but also the potential and well-documented downsides as well. Chief Executive Officer of the Jamaica Environment Trust, Dr. Teresa Rodriguez Moody, thanks so much for joining us and helping us better appreciate that all the glitters may not be gold or oil for Jamaica. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Coming up, from the island that gave Rastafari to the world, is Jamaica doing enough to protect the legal rights of those who live the faith? Join us to examine that gap next.
The internationally acclaimed On Stage with Winfred Williams.
At a new time, Saturdays at 8 p.m. on CVM TV.
So much more than entertainment.
Jamaica, make we do the right thing. Make we live good today for a better tomorrow. Talk it out. Don't fight it out. The time by the Ministry of National Security is
6:30. Lead like the world is watching.
Because it is.
The Impact Leadership Summit brings the ultimate business advantage on May 5 at the AC Marriott Hotel, Kingston, Jamaica. Learn from global speaker and entrepreneur, Vusi Tembakwaya.
Leaders, hear me and hear me now. Do they understand the calling and are they God-led?
Maxwell Leadership Coach Erica McKenzie.
CEO and founder Deshaun Savadia. Minister Ovid Hill.
Investment Guru Ramon Small Ferguson.
This is where leaders rise and impact begins.
For more info, call 876-438-1.
This week marks the 60th anniversary of Emperor Haile Selassie's historic visit to Jamaica on April 21st, 1966. A moment that remains one of the most significant in the history of the Rastafari faith and in Jamaica's cultural story. Against that backdrop, a significant regional debate has erupted about the legal status of Rastafari in the Caribbean. On March 31, 2026, Prime Minister Dr. Terence Drew of St. Kitts and Nevis declared in the National Assembly that his country had become the first Caribbean nation to formally recognize Rastafari in law, with members of the community now able to practice their faith openly and without fear of criminalization. Jamaica's government pushed back. Culture Minister Olivia Grange stated that Jamaica's Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms, enacted in 2011, has always recognized all religions, including Rastafari, under Section 13, subsection 3, paragraph B, which guarantees freedom of conscience and religion to all citizens. Others disagree, arguing that general protection under a broad constitutional clause is not the same as explicit recognition. Attorney at law Marcus Goff works at the intersection of religious rights, drug policy and constitutional law, and he joins us now. Mr. Goff, good evening.
Good evening, Julia.
Thanks so much for joining us, Marcus Goff. This is a conversation that has been going on with various senators weighing in. Senator Abka Fitz-Henley has argued that the Charter of Rights, Section 13, already hardcodes Rastafari protection. Why would you argue that that implicit protection is no longer enough?
Right. Well, I mean, what we see is that, although the Constitution recognizes freedom of religion and freedom of expression, freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, etc., the fact is that the Rastafari community has historically, been denounced and marginalized and discriminated against, primarily because of our strong anti-colonial stance. And so what we find is that in implementation and in enforcement of these rights, oftentimes Rastafari is not particularly appreciated, or our nuances as a community are not properly respected and recognized. And so that's the issue that we still face, in the workplace, issues with locks in schools, beards in the workplace seen as unkempt, and we have issues concerning rights to be free from certain vaccinations, and so issues surrounding those kind of particular aspects of our community are still, we think, not properly reflected and protected. Of course, our ganja rights too, even in the Drug Amendment Act, we think are not fully and comprehensively respected and protected. And so we still have a journey to go, although we recognize that we've come far from where we were 100 years ago.
We still see cases that you've spoken about, cases of discrimination with regard to hair, potential hair cutting even in schools and workplaces. If the Charter is supreme, as the Senator argues, why are these breaches then still occurring?
I think because there has been embedded discrimination against Rastafari for generations in Jamaica. and we've not had the kind of, I think, proper respect paid and the proper education put in place nationwide, in schools, in society more broadly, to eradicate the generations of anti-Rastafari sentiment and rhetoric which has been displayed openly by the government and the society. And so unless we purposely take steps to, backtrack from those harmful perspectives and narratives that we still see playing out in our society, right, then we're going to still have for many generations to come Jamaicans who feel that Rastafari is somehow second to non-Rastafarians, secondary to maybe Christians in terms of rights, and essentially something that the majority of Jamaicans don't want to see their children or their families embrace. And so we have to be more calculated in decolonizing the minds and our society of anti-Rastafari sentiment that was sown by the colonial government of Jamaica over many years.
Marcus Goff, we're seeing St. Kitts and Nevis put explicit legislative recognition. How does that model of having it written out in a piece of legislation vary from the more social accommodation model that Jamaica uses here? What is the benefit of having it written out and spelled out for a Rastafari man, woman or child here in Jamaica or even in St. Kitts versus the, of course we have it here, stance that Jamaica seems to have taken?
It would be that we would not have to leave then our rights and the protection of our rights up to enforcement and interpretation by persons who may not, as I say, have the proper perspective of Rastafari's place in society. And so where we have the law more expressly spelled out, where we have Rastafari rights more clearly delineated in law, and where there will be in law consequences for breach of those rights, that's what I think would be a greater deterrent to those who feel that Rastafari rights can still be ignored, and will be a greater sense of acknowledgement by the state, by society, that Rastafari today are recognized as having certain rights that we didn't have recognition of years ago. So express language, I think, would help with awareness and with enforcement.
Express language might do that as well, but we also have another senator in Jamaica's parliament saying express language would also force review. Senator Alan Bernard from the People's National Party arguing that explicit constitutional recognition would compel broader legislative review, forcing Parliament to harmonize existing laws with Rastafari rights. Is that constitutional recognition something that in practice would actually push all of our pieces of legislation to make sure that they are in accordance with this now provision that we're being told exists in Section 13? Or is it aspirational? Seems good, feels nice, might not do what it is that Senator Bernard is suggesting?
Right, so one law or just having the law alone amended with express language wouldn't solve all of the, again, decades of anti-Rastafari sentiment that we still have to grapple with. And so we need to have a public education campaign in schools, in society more broadly, because we know that Rastafari children still continue to experience discrimination, to be teased and mocked in school concerning blacks, concerning ganja, concerning Rastafari faith. And so the law alone won't change things.
If you put it in the Constitution, though, allowing that higher law to say, and we explicitly recognize the only religion that has been created in the 20th century, Rastafari, then does that help?
It helps, but it doesn't go far enough. Certainly from my perspective, I am a proponent of the recognition of Rastafari indigenous rights, because religious rights, I think, is still limited into the properly protecting Rastafari, multi-purpose, multi-dimensional facets. We are spiritual, cultural, political, economic movement and people. And so indigenous rights would more accord with our self-determination, or rights to land, or rights to certain freedoms when it comes to the practice of the faith outside of simply ganja. And so that would, I think, be a better protection for Rastafari liberty as a comprehensive whole going forward.
Indigeneity, though, often is understood in the context of people being in a space for a long period of time. That is, there has been no space without these people. When claiming Indigenous rights in this way, people then often respond and react saying, Rastafari, very Jamaican, but not quite Indigenous in the sense of therefore having land rights and having then greater and general rights. Why do you and others make that claim that a greater, broader recognition of Rastafari, not just as a religion, but as more, is more in line with what Rastafari is and what its adherents believe in?
Well, Rastafari itself has always said that we are not a religion. Right? Because again, we don't want to be confined and defined and to be viewed through the narrow lens of religion, right? And so Rastafari has historically been a very political, very anti-colonial force to be reckoned with, and so that can't or should not be ignored, right? Rastafari has had land rights, including rights concerning Pinnacle and other spaces like that, where we have been forcibly removed and evicted. Again, we don't have that kind of element in general religious freedoms, and so land rights are a part of what we think we are entitled to because of our distinctive character, right? Outside of just religious character, distinctive character that expresses ourselves in a multiplicity of ways that we think religion is too narrow to properly protect. And so the multiplicity of indigenous rights, including land, including intellectual property, as well to cultural integrity and autonomy, are all important for the security and preservation of our unique traditions in Rastafari.
As you have the ability now to speak to legislators and to the general public about the sort of changing of hearts and minds, but also codifying this into law, what do you say to them as someone who works in this area, but also then is Rastafari yourself? What do you say to them about where Jamaica needs to go next?
I think it's almost 100 years now since Rastafari has been existent in Jamaica, right? And so I say, while we have seen progress in terms of acceptance in certain aspects, I don't think we properly, I say, had the kind of reparatory justice that Rastafari deserved, because without a doubt, from 1920s up until clearly into the Coral Gardens and beyond, we've had generations of anti-Rastafari sentiment and persecution. And so we now need, in this era of indigenous rights, the 21st century, to come to grips with this anti-colonial movement, to embrace Rastafari as a post-colonial, anti-colonial liberation struggle that we need to recognize has preserved for us some integrity as to where we are now. And so I think we would want and deserve, and Jamaica would want, I think, to celebrate Rastafari properly nowadays as we think we deserve. That means, again, in the multiplicity of what we are, looking at how we can protect what we have preserved for the future going forward. So again, Coral Gardens is a big part of what we recognize has been the scars of the past. And we are grateful for what we've seen as Coral Gardens. We're part of justice. Again, not perfect, but in the right direction. We want to be fully embraced, to have rights to be seen as equals, to have a say in governance, to have our rights to self-governance also recognized as well too, and to have the police and other resources of the state put to the service of Rastafari's preservation.
Marcus Goff, attorney at law, thank you so much for that analysis and speaking to us inside Lead Story.
Thank you.
After the break, we ask whether Jamaica's government is meeting its duty of care to protect life and access on its own coastline. Lead Story returns in a moment.
Everybody want to save a country right now.
One thing about Jamaicans, we might have differences, but we know when something is good for all of us. And when we work together against crime and violence, we are stronger than ever. And that's how we know the Citizen Security Plan can work.
That one that name CSP.
The Citizen Security Plan is an initiative of the Ministry of National Security in partnership with the European Union. It's an all-of-government effort to create safer streets and build stronger communities. Go to mns.gov.jm to learn how you can play your part.
Power in great moments. If you have financial needs, Chris and Charles will fix them for you. Power in great moments since 1992. Oh, we have it all. Power in great moments. Relax, you got Chris and Charles. Oh, we have it all. When you think alone.
Jamaica's beaches are public spaces, legally and culturally. But tonight, questions are emerging about access, safety, and accountability. This week, a viral video showed barbed wire fencing blocking a section of Negril's 7 Mile beach. Erected by a UDC, or Urban Development Commission tenant for security reasons. The UDC removed the fence within an hour of notification. Access was restored. But the incident reignited a structural debate about the legal framework that governs Jamaicans' beach access. At Helsha Beach in St. Catherine, a different story. Community groups in the area say they have repeatedly appealed to the Urban Development Corporation for safety infrastructure, lifeguards, hazard markers, and intervention at sites where coastal erosion has created dangerous conditions. Those appeals, they say, have gone unanswered. We're bringing in now the man who talks about beaches, has focused himself and his organization on beaches, Dr. Devon Taylor, president of the Jamaica Beach Birthright Environmental Movement, JABEM. And he's with us now. Dr. Taylor, good evening and welcome to Lead Story.
Greetings. Good to be here.
Thanks so much for joining us. Do incidents like the Negril fence point to a broader governance issue here in Jamaica? Because the person who put up the fence said that he had security issues that led to him putting up a fence. But the very idea of fencing for others is offensive. What do you say?
Well, fencing is offensive, but we should not make this brethren a victim. And why I'm saying that is because, when you look across the corridor of Negril, all those properties are fenced, and they're fenced in so tight that no Jamaicans can cross those property and access the beach. Yes, there are some access points along the 7 Mile beach that the public can use, but the issue of walls and fencing is a big problem across the country, and the hotel industry is more guilty than this one Jamaican individual who was trying to secure his property, which we do not condone fencing of any sort, but the structural problem where most of the coastline in the country is walled off, and it's walled off by the powerful. And it's the powerful that the UDC should be confronting and remove those walls within an hour, or sanction these hotel industry to remove those walls so the sea is not blocked off, from the Jamaican people. So you don't give UDC any kudos at all for having heard that this fence is there and removing it, and instead think that they have potentially scapegoated this man? Is that what I'm to understand you to be saying? Well, you're not judged in an exam on one question if you answer that question correctly. You're judged on the overall performance. And what I'm looking at here is the UDC's overall performance. We, JABEM, along with 9 other plaintiffs, are in court right now just for the Little Duns River, beach and river in Ocho Rios. And in the last 6 months, the UDCs have scooped in and fenced the place like a prison. Razor wires, chain link fence, is encircled that place. Right, the UDC is the same one that is divesting Font Hill Beach, that is divesting Pearly Beach, that is divesting Walter Fletcher Beach, that is setting to divest One Man Beach, Old Hospital Beach in Montego Bay, It is the same UDC that has transferred, the Laughing Waters to private entity. It's the same UDC that is involved in a deal that transfers 741 acres of land, and a watershed to build hotels. So I cannot really not put that into perspective. Yes, the fence was supposed to be removed, and it was removed. But if we're talking about the UDC's action in Jamaica as it relates to protection of beach access rights for the country, then they have a failing grade on that.
We also have been hearing about what's going on in Helsha because community groups say that they have been making repeated appeals for safety infrastructure to be put in place. And we've recently heard of the case of a young man who died along that area. At what point does the safety or the failure to put safety infrastructure there become a breach of constitutional rights to protect life? And who is responsible at the very end of the day for safety at beaches like Helsha?
Well, it's, and condolences to the families of the individual who have lost their life. That is something that we do take very seriously. And it's one of the things that JABEM and the communities that we work with make sure that someone within that community is a trained lifeguard. And that's something that we are very serious about. Now, the state, have long stepped away from their responsibility to really provide these kind of training for communities, right? And to make sure that, these kind of, resources are available and training, because it's not lack of really individuals to be trained and ready to respond in case of emergency. The people are there to be trained. And so, would urge them to partner with, because what I heard you just mentioned is that the community is reaching out, right, to the UDC to partner with them to help them to deal with safety arrangements at the beach. And the UDC should do so because they stand ready, to respond. So, that's a very serious issue. And so we are going to join with the Helsha community to reach out. And if the Helsha community also want to reach out to us, we could also help them to connect with services that can provide lifeguard training. Because at the end of the day, these are community spaces. And many of these spaces are fishing associations and community. And, it's just need to be organized to make sure that all these, necessary resources are there. But the state has a responsibility, right, to work closely with communities in order to protect lives.
This is, though, something that JABEM has made very clear. Community groups are also having their voices added to the call. But at what point do we say the state is required through its agencies to provide both access in the case that we have seen in Negril, or at other places? We've received videos of places where individuals say that they have gone to fly kites or they've gone to participate in beach life and haven't been able to do so, and also safety, controlling the crowd, making sure that it's a safe place for people to be at. How is the law, you believe, meant to find that balance?
Well, what we really want here, and it's something that we, this is why we're calling for a withdrawal of the new beach access and management policy of 2026 that the government put forward, because it does not treat community as a partner and a stakeholder. It's a top-down approach where community do not have a seat at the table. What we need to have happen is these relationships, because communities are the custodians and the stewards of these spaces. They need to have a relationship with the communities to build, right, what the community know best to do to protect themselves. And by not bringing them to the table, we're going to have these gaps, whether it's gaps in resources that would save lives, whether it's gaps in protecting the environment and make sure that erosions are not taking place, best practices in terms of conservation, are gaps in security, right? These are the things that the community know very best. And the state need to partner with them. And this is why the policy should have at the center communities that, live in these spaces, survive in these spaces, and will protect them. Now, as far as where the law is concerned, what is the responsibility of a state? The primary responsibility of the state is to make sure that its people are safe, This is why you see the security force is, doing what they're doing in their anti-crime move, is to protect the state. Now you should also protect people within this space, and the best way to do so is to provide the training that the communities at the coastline needs in order to help protect the safety of the nation.
I think that's so important then for all our stakeholders, both citizens and state agencies, to see and to better appreciate. Everybody's trying their best, but you don't get, what is that Dr. Taylor said? You don't get tested on your answer to one question on the test. You don't get graded on one answer on the test. Dr. Devon Taylor, President of the Jamaica Beach Birthright Environmental Movement, thank you so much for being with us tonight inside Lead Story.
Thank you.
Here's my take. In the NARA bill, we see a government trying to move faster than the systems have allowed. In oil, we see a country confronting the possibility of wealth without full certainty of the cost. In Rastafari rights, we see a culture that is celebrated, exported by Jamaica, but we're still questioning whether it's fully protected in law. And on our beaches, we see the gap between access and safety. It's consistent, but we're looking at it. And our big question is, can Jamaica build, develop, and expand without weakening the structures that protect its people? Because speed without safeguards is risk, opportunity without oversight is exposure, and rights without clarity are not secure. The test now is not whether Jamaica can move forward. The test is whether it can do so responsibly, lawfully, and sustainably. Reconstruction is not only about roads and bridges. It's about whether Jamaica, after Melissa, after Beryl, after all of it, chooses to build institutions that serve every citizen. Tonight on 4 different fronts, that choice is being made. That